by cervid farming.
Yeah.
We've had far too many examples, and Doug has shared that with you, just the extent to which we see, state by state by state slowly getting, picked off because somebody moved a trophy deer from state A to state B and it was infected and it got out, or others got out of the pens, and then it affects locals.
Yeah. Now, has that made the jump to bison or elk or any of those other animals yet?
Not yet. It's several kinds of deer, as you know, but not those.
Mule deer so far. There has been some cases in the West.
Yeah.
But it's primarily whitetails, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and then there's been a deer in Korea, a type of deer there, and one in the Scandinavian countries.
One?
Yeah. I mean, different kinds of deer types that are there. Yeah. So the one we worry about right now is getting into the caribou in the northern Canada. Right now, the range of the deer that are infected in the provinces of Canada is right butting up next to caribou. And, of course, if you're not a hunter, you would know this, but caribou, obviously, the herds are remarkable, unlike, whitetails or, for that matter, elk. If you got it into caribou, it would likely spread very quickly. And as you know, the native populations, the caribou are key. They're key to their livelihood.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to see it get in the caribou.
Now, I didn't even know that it was in Canada. What parts of Canada has it been?
Throughout a number of provinces. I think there's 4 provinces now it's in. It's spreading. It's the same phenomena that a combination of a deer movement with cervid farming, and then once it's in an area, it'll keep migrating a bit as these animals move somewhere. But, as we know, deer don't fly 4,000 miles every season, okay?
Yeah.
So it's not that kind of movement. If we're going to see a big movement, it's humans are doing it.
As our good friend Doug Duren has been doing all this work to try to alert people about it, and also they're putting up these testing places where hunters can bring in a deer and have the deer tested. How much of that is available to people around the country, though?
Not nearly enough. And that's what we need to work on, is if you don't make it easy and convenient, as you know, it's not going to get done.
Yeah.
And so, it's hard enough to convince people that there's really a problem, because people don't want to believe it, even if they know that there's, CWD in deer in the area, and we have some like that. But I think the tide is changing. More and more people are sensitive to it. They want to have access to testing quickly. But if it's going to take you a month and a half to get the test back, you know what it is about processing.
Is it that long?
Well, in some cases, they get so busy because, unlike laboratory testing for an entire year, where I do 1/12 in January, 1/12 in February, et cetera, et cetera. Deer season typically is very concentrated in just a couple of weeks to a month in the fall. And so the problem is all the animals come in at that time, so your lab capacity has to handle that huge surge all at one time. And so sometimes it takes a while to get it back.
So these hunters just hope they don't take a bite during that time.
Yeah, and we hope that these prions don't ultimately infect people and jump. But if they do, I worry what will happen to deer hunting as we know it, because probably a lot of people will, not continue, and we need that desperately for herd management. I mean, it's the way we do it.
Well, what they're doing in Doug's area is they're actively trying to eliminate a lot of deer and try to drastically lower the numbers, particularly of bucks. Which I guess they wander more.
Yep, they do. Yep. Yeah.
It's all really scary stuff. Because if they do make the jump to humans, it has made the jump to, I believe, mice. Is that the case?
Well, what happened was originally it didn't. And so that was some of the data that was used to support, it's not a problem.
Right.
Now, these what we call humanized mice, or mice that are basically much more like a human, we're now seeing that jump occurring. And these new strains, the strains that, again, were around 20 years ago are not the same ones today, because as these prions continue to pass from animal to animal to animal, they go through these little minor mutations. And they're getting more and more like what a human transmissible prion might look like. So in these mice studies now that are really made to mimic a human, we're starting to see that jump.
Yeah, and folks, if you've never seen a deer with CWD, you should go and Google it, because it's terrifying. The idea that could make that jump to human beings, and people pouring saliva out of their mouths and their whole body just wasted away to skin and bones.
Right.
That's what we're looking at. That's why it's called chronic wasting disease, because the animals literally waste away.
We actually have a major resource center on our website, free of charge, open, and it's all on chronic wasting disease. So people want to go there. It's www.cidrap.umn.edu, and you can go there and all these pictures, all the kinds of
again? What is it again?
www.cidrap, CIDRAP, CIDRAP.
CIDRAP.
Yep, just Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, CIDRAP.umn.edu.
.umn.edu.
And we have a lot of information. There it is. That's it.
Chronic
You got it right
Disease
there. That's
Resource
it.
Center.
Yep. And we've got a lot of information on there also about coronaviruses. We have a whole resource center just for the coronaviruses too.
Novel coronavirus.
There you go.
So for the average person that is sitting around reading these articles that say "Don't worry," or reading these articles that say this is the end of humanity, what could these people do? Like what could they do, and what do they do if they get infected?
Well, first of all, neither of those kind of articles are correct, and we have to make sure that we get that message out to people that it's there. We need straight talk right now, and part of it is it's so hard you hear from people who are supposed experts, what's this going to happen or not happen, and let me just give you an example, because we've heard a lot about, well, it's going to go away with the coronavirus with the seasons. Okay, when it warms up, it'll go away. Well, the other coronaviruses that we've had to worry about was SARS, which appeared in 2003 in China. And when that came out of China in February 2003, it took us a little while to figure out that these people really aren't that infectious till day 5 or 6 of their illness. And then they really crash and burn, and many of them would die. But what we did was basically, by knowing that, identify these cases and their contacts quickly. And so if they had symptoms, brought them in, put them in these isolation rooms so they wouldn't infect anybody else. And it took until June to bring that under control. That had nothing to do with the seasons. MERS, which is another coronavirus that's in the Middle East, it's in the Arabian Peninsula, the natural reservoir for that is camels. In China, by the way, SARS, it was palm civets, and a type of animal food, rodent, that we got out of the markets there. In the Arabian Peninsula, we're not going to euthanize 1.7 camels, to try to get rid of MERS. And there, it's 110 degrees out, and this virus is transmitted fine, thank you. I mean, it goes from animals to people, it goes in the hospitals. There's no evidence it's seasonal there.
So that's a good myth to expose right away. This is not something that's going to cure up when it gets warm.
If it does, it won't be because there's a model for it.
What will it be? Because how does something like SARS run through a population and then stop being around anymore?
Well, it wouldn't have, but had we had good public health, had we had the same kind of transmission we're seeing with this coronavirus, where you're infectious before you ever get sick, where you're highly infectious. Remember with SARS, now you didn't really get infectious till you're in 6 days of illness, and you knew that you were in trouble. And then you could isolate you. And we didn't understand that at first, and the virus transmitted. So that's why SARS stopped. MERS stops because we don't get rid of the camels, so it keeps hitting humans day after day. But then when they go to the hospital, we no longer allow those individuals to transmit to others in the hospital, because we do what we call good infection control. As soon as they get there, they're in special rooms with special masks and all this kind of thing. And so in that regard, these coronaviruses can be stopped. This one's not. As I said at the top of the program, this is like trying to stop the wind. Influenza transmission, you never hear anybody saying in a bad seasonal flu year, we're going to stop this one. If you don't have a vaccine that works, you don't. It's just breathing. That's all it is.
So what's best case scenario here?
Well, I think as I laid out to you before, this could be 10 times worse than a really bad seasonal flu year. And I'll grant you it will hit, primarily the older population and those with underlying health problems. But as I mentioned also, we have a lot of people who have other risk factors. Obesity, high blood pressure is another risk factor where you can have a really bad outcome with this. And so we don't quite know what it's going to do yet. I think, we've been right on the mark predicting where it's going to be to today. I think from here on out, I can tell you it's going to stay around for months. It's not going to go away tomorrow. We got to stop thinking about, if we just get through tomorrow, that's it. So if we're going to close schools, we're going to tell people not to go into public, we're going to cancel big events. How long are we prepared to do that? What are we going to do? We have to ask ourselves that. I think the big thing is eventually enough people get infected where it'll be like putting reactors in the rods in the reaction, I should say, and then that stops it by itself. But
how so?
Because if 2 of the 3 of us in this room were immune right now to it because we'd had it and recovered and had protection, because of natural protection, then I couldn't transmit to anybody. So that's what's going to happen if you get enough people who get infected. Ultimately, then it'll slow down and stop transmission that way, but that's a heck of a price to pay to get there.
Is it safe to say that we're fairly fortunate that this isn't something like the Spanish flu or something that's really ruthlessly deadly?
Well, that's where I think we have to be really careful. Just to back up, about 0.1% of people who get seasonal flu die. And granted, it's mostly older or younger people, okay? That's 1 out of 1,000. With this one right now in China, we're seeing between 2 and 3% of the people die. And some say, well, that's way too high. It's not going to be that high. It's going to be lower. But again, and they say that because we didn't pick up all the milder illnesses, okay? But on the other hand, we have a lot of additional people in countries like ours that have even more risk factors for having bad outcomes than China. And so Spanish flu, the one you mentioned, 1918, that was about a 3 to 3.2% case fatality rate. Now, it did preferentially impact 18 to 25-year-olds. They were the hardest hit group.
Yeah, why was that?
Well, it has to do with your immune response again. We think that what happened is when this virus got into you, it created what we call a cytokine storm, which is an antibody response in your body that's out of control. And it basically, you destroy yourself. And it sets this thing up to trigger it off.
So the healthier people had the more adverse reaction to it.
Exactly. Or the other group that has had a real challenge with that are pregnant women. And pregnant women have a very unique issue. One is, of course, they have some constriction of their lungs just by the very physical mass, but also their immune system is really at a heightened state at that point. There's a part of that immune system, and that woman says, this is not all me, get rid of this. It's like a rejection of a graft. And the other part saying, this is the most precious cargo I'll ever carry. I got to make sure I don't lose it. And when that virus got in between those two, it started, again, that same kind of cytokine storm. Now, the thing that concerns us about this, what we saw in 1918, I mentioned just 3+%. This one could be as high as 2%. So it's somewhere between a really bad flu year at 0.1%, and it could be as high up here, getting closer to 1918-like. And that's those numbers I just gave you a few minutes ago from the American Hospital Association of, 480,000 deaths here in this country over the next 6 to 12 months.
What can someone do to shore up their immune system while this is all going on?
Well, a couple things. First of all, just being as healthy as you can be. Wait. I'm getting up there right now where, it becomes more and more of a challenge to stay, in good shape. The more you can do to do that, something all about, is keeping in shape is really important. Second thing is, if you're on medications, like for high blood pressure, don't miss them. Take those drugs because they're really important, even though they may not appear, you don't have any symptoms of high blood pressure or something like that. And then I think just, getting sleep and eating a healthy diet. And that's about what we can do today to help get you prepared for this.
Is there anything else someone could do, like maybe IV vitamin drips or anything that's going to really...
Yeah, and then you leave them on there. I think the cruelest human experiment we've done in a long time with humans is leave them on these ships. Get them off right